Shri Majid Mehman Sahab, Jafri Ji, Feroz Khan Ghazi Sahab, Shri Kaviraj Singh Ji, Shri Alok Kumar Pandey Ji, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, first of all, may I compliment the Indian National Bar Association for organizing today's symposium on a subject which will always continue to remain topical, not only in the Indian context, but even in the global circumstances that we are living in. Well, I do not know whether there is unity in diversity in India, but one thing I do know is that there is diversity in India, and that diversity would have to be acknowledged, if not reckoned with. If you were to take the map of Europe and turn it vertical, you would find that it roughly occupies the same amount of space as the Indian subcontinent does. In the European space, you find over 50 countries. And in the Indian subcontinental space, you find only 5. And the reason for that is that the Occidental mindset, wherever it sees diversity, ethnic, religious, cultural, the tendency has to be or has been to divide and separate. And therefore, there is an argument which is advanced that what really is the rationale for the existence of, let's say, a country like Belgium? After all, it is nothing else but the Flemish-speaking part of Netherlands. The short point that I was trying to make is that the Occidental mindset, unlike the Oriental mindset, unfortunately did not develop the capacity to be able to assimilate, imbibe the various cultural influences and strains which go into making nation states. And therefore, you find the territorial diversity between Europe, which of course attained the age of enlightenment much earlier than the Asian century, which has just about commenced. But it is a very telling critique as to how different cultures tend to deal with the question of diversity. Diversity, to me, really represents the evolution of civilization over the millennia. It represents the unfolding of religion. It represents the assimilation of cultural strains. It represents interracial mixing, at times voluntary, at times forced. But in its truest essence, diversity really celebrates human existence in its totality, as it has marched over the ages and centuries to the state where it finds itself today. The most classical instrument which has been able to homogenize this great diverse world that we live in is possibly the internet. The internet today represents the greatest and the most audacious experiment in anarchy. But it also represents the ability of people who come from very diverse cultural backgrounds, very diverse upbringings, not only to share experiences with each other in real time, but also try and understand what different experiences really represent. So therefore, while diversity remains intact, the ability to be able to understand it better, I think, has been one of the greatest contributions of the march of technology. But then, how does a modern nation state deal with this diversity? Well, the best way of dealing with diversity is to possibly leave those core values, those ideals, those convictions, whether they are religious or otherwise, which really go into shaping the spiritual quotient of a human being outside the domain of the state. Because the greatest danger or the greatest peril is if the state starts intruding or tries to put a uniform construct through possibly a jackboot mode, you may possibly run the risk of actually an implosion rather than any kind of cohesiveness really being able to take shape. And that is why countries, leaders, people have to realize that a pagan is not a Christian is not a Muslim is not a Hindu is not a Sikh, and I've only started on the question of religious diversity. If we get into intra-faith diversity, it really becomes far more complex. And if you go down the path of gender diversity, orientation diversity, and various other forms of diversities which exist, then possibly you can only but conclude that it is best for any state to really remain outside the personal domain. But then the question would arise, what about religious sanctioned violence? What about religious sanctified violence? For example, if somebody was to claim that my religion enjoins upon me to do violence against others, how would a modern state really deal with it? And the method of dealing with it is to obviously circumscribe that violence, because while you are entitled to your own personal space, you are entitled to your own beliefs, you are entitled to your own core convictions, but you are not entitled to really transgress and violently transgress into the space of the others. And I think that is really what the essence of diversity is all about. In various societies, you have this continuing debate. Now, for example, even in the Western societies, the debate on abortion still has not come to an end. The debate between pro-life and pro-choice is something which continues. And possibly, whether human conception is something which can be terminated by a deliberate act of an individual or is divinely ordained, really goes into the genesis of what diversity of thought is. Or for that matter, the custom in certain indigenous societies to possibly not wear clothes. And therefore, because we live in what we call a civilized society, does that give us a right to really impose our value system, our choices onto somebody else? And therefore, the debate on diversity can get broader and wider. And that's why I think I agree with what Jafri Saab had said, that the Indian constitutions, the framers of the Indian constitution were extremely wise men. And they decided to leave the personal space, by and large, unrestricted. And whether you interpret secularism, which was added much later to the Indian constitution, as a separation of the church and the state, or as Sarvadharm Sambhav, which means equal benefaction for all religions. In essence, what it really means is the religious, cultural, and the personal space is really left alone. And I do hope that the powers that be would see the wisdom of the framers of the Indian Constitution and not try and intrude or interfere into this personal space. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
धन्यवाद सर। मित्रों, भारतीय संविधान अपने आप में देश की दिशा और दशा तय करने का एक धरोहर के रूप में हमारे बीच में है और देश की विभिन्नता पर, संविधान की उपयोगिता पर मनीष जी ने समुचित प्रकाश डाला। आज हमारे बीच में हमारा सौभाग्य है भारतवर्ष के क्रिमिनल साइड के बहुत बड़े अधिवक्ता और हम सब के बीच में पहली बार हम लोगों का परिचय होगा संस्था के मार्फत। वैसे तो आप सब सारे लोग मिलते हैं, जानते हैं, और मैं आपके सहृदयता की थोड़ी सी चर्चा करूंगा। हम लोगों ने जब आपको आमंत्रित करने के लिए इस विषय के साथ आपके घर पे गए तो आपने विषय देखा, ना कि संस्था, ऑर्गेनाइजेशन, कौन कर रहा है कौन नहीं कर रहा। आपने विषय को देखा और तुरंत सहमति दी कि आप लोग ये कर रहे हैं, मैं निश्चित तौर पर उस पर आऊँगा, और उन्होंने अपना वादा निभाया। मैं आदरणीय माजिद मेमन साहब से निवेदन करूँगा कि वो अपने विचार को हमारे समक्ष रखें।
Honorable Shri Ram Jethmalani ji, Member of Parliament and a distinguished senior counsel of our country, my friend Manish Tiwari ji, Jafri Sahab, Ghazi Sahab, Kalraj Singh Sahab, Alok Pandey ji, all the members of South Asian Minority Lawyers Association, Indian National Bar Association, and Avni Trust, and all my brothers and sisters at the bar, journalist friends, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great privilege for me personally and an honor that I have been given this opportunity to meet you first and then to express my views briefly on such an important subject like unity in diversity, a constitutional goal. I must congratulate the organizers for choosing an extremely important and burning subject. Unity in diversity in today's atmosphere in India is indeed